can't get no satisfaction, and that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit. Talking about dissatisfaction. We're going to be continuing to look at the life of King David, who struggled with, unfortunately, a lot of things. I mean, he was an excellent king. He's king over Israel, and we're going to be looking at the time period in his life between the ages of about 37 and the ages of 70, so it's a big span there. But in his early 40s, David was at the peak of his success. I mean, they had conquered everybody. He was a mighty warrior. He had a huge palace. He had, a number of wives, and he had a bunch of concubines. He had all the money he could ever want. Basically, I mean, especially in a guy's eyes, he had everything. He's just had everything he could ever imagine. But he was dissatisfied. He was not a happy guy. To understand what that means, I want us to look at first, what does it mean to be satisfied? There's the Merriam-Webster's definition is a happy or pleased feeling because of something you did or something that happened to you. So the opposite is dissatisfaction. It was a lot shorter thing. It's a feeling of unhappiness or disapproval. So David is unhappy. Now David has everything, like we said. He had it all. He had a kingdom, he had allies, he had love and respect of his people. He had all the money he could want. Yet he was unhappy. He was like a playboy with nothing to do. He just couldn't seem to be satisfied. So we're going to look at that. 2 Samuel chapter 11. If you want to follow along with me, it's on page 247 in your 2 Bibles. We're going to read about probably the most famous sin that David committed. So, in the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. And David sent someone to go find out about her. The man said, "Isn't this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. She had purified herself from her uncleanness. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, "I am pregnant." So David sent this word to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent him to David, and when Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was doing, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants, and did not go down to his house. When David was told, Uriah did not go home. He asked him, "Haven't you just come from a distance? Why didn't you go home?" Uriah said to David, "The ark of Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my master Joab and my lord's men are camped on the open fields. How could I go to my house and eat and drink and lie with my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing." Well, then David said to him, "Stay here one more day, and tomorrow I'll send you back." So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants. He did not go home. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it, David wrote, "Put Uriah in the front line where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him, so he will be struck down and die." So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at the place where he knew the strongest defenders were. When the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. Joab sent David a full account of the battle. He instructed the messenger, "When you have finished giving the king the account of the battle, the king's anger may flare up, and he may ask you, 'Why did you get so close to the city to fight? Didn't you know that they would shoot arrows from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal? Didn't a woman throw an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died at the beds? Why did you get so close to the wall?' If he asks you this, then say to him, 'Also, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead.'" The messenger set out, and when he arrived, he told David everything Joab sent to him. The messenger said to David, "The men overpowered us and came out against us in the open, but we drove them back to the entrance of the city gate. Then the archers shot arrows at your servants from the wall, and some of your servants, the king's men, died. Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead." David told the messenger, "Say this to Joab, don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. Press the attack against the city and destroy it. Say this to encourage Joab." When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. As we look, this is a pretty tragic story in David's life. It's not what we would think of a great man would be doing. He really did something we just all really find terrible. But you know what? The beginning of this is where David got in trouble, was the very beginning of the chapter. It said, "In the spring, when kings go to war, David stayed home." Instead of going, this time he thought he'd stay home, I don't know what he was planning on doing. Obviously he didn't have a plan, because he was sitting around at home and he had nothing to do. I mean, he's a warrior. He was sitting at home with a lot of free time on his hands. And I guess he was bored with the other women, I don't know. And he was up on his roof taking a walk, and he looked down and he saw a beautiful woman taking a bath. And he decided that he needed that woman. And he believed with his authority he could have any woman he wanted. He was a king. He could do what he wanted. And as a woman in that time period, when she was summoned by the king, she probably didn't feel like she could say no. So she said yes, and they had sex together, and before he knew it, that she was pregnant. And within a couple of months, she discovered she was pregnant. Now David realized he was in big trouble. I mean, that isn't his wife. She's married to somebody else. It didn't seem to matter to him that she was married. And he knew, too, he found out that Uriah was a good man, a man that wouldn't take pleasure in his wife until the rest of the army was home. So David was trying to find a way to cover this up, and he brings Uriah back, and he assumed any man that would have been away from this beautiful woman for any time period would have taken care of, went home and slept with her. And maybe that integrity also made David a little angry, to know that Uriah was more disciplined than David was. That man actually was acting better than the king. But whatever the reason, David decided, well, we're going to get rid of Uriah. If he's not going to go sleep with his wife and pretend, and make that his kid, we're going to send him out to war, and we're going to make sure he dies. And that's what he did. With Uriah gone, David would marry Bathsheba and pretend that maybe that their child was a bit premature. Because, anybody could do the math and would know that that wasn't his. But he did that anyway. He chose to engage in an adulterous affair. And he brought great regret to his life and calamity to his family for years. All the way to the end of his life, there was consequences from what he chose to do this time. Because of David's, later he repented and he was forgiven. And there is hope for all of us that do make major sins in our life, make major bad choices. But he did not escape the consequences from his bad choice. David chose to chase an affair, and those consequences chased him the rest of his life. Dissatisfaction in a marriage has consequences, and one of the results is often divorce. A new study entitled "Divorce and Death" shows that broken marriages can kill at the same rate as smoking cigarettes. Indications of the risk of dying is a full 23% higher among divorcees than married people. One researcher determined that a single divorce costs the state and federal government about $30,000 based on the higher use of food stamps and public assistance. The nation's 1.4 million divorces in 2002 are estimated to have cost the taxpayers more than $30 billion. Let's be candid. Every marriage knows seasons or cycles of dissatisfaction. We've all heard of the 7-year itch. Well, at least a lot of us older ones have heard of the 7-year itch. We have some young people that haven't had to worry about that yet. But 7-year itch is something, actually it was made real popular in the 50s, and I had no idea that's where it came from. Marilyn Monroe was in a movie called The 7-Year Itch, and it was exactly that. Unfortunately, it was a married gentleman that saw a beautiful woman. And after, so there's been a bunch of studies to see if that's a real thing. Believe it or not, people pay money to have scientists and researchers figure this all out. So that's there's a number of those. It says there's a 7-year mark that maybe it's the timing or the relationships are less exciting or there's habits and traits that used to be bearable when you were dating and first married, but now they're like somebody's grating their fingernails on a chalkboard. So maybe those things have started to bug you. In 1999, there was a study by Dr. Larry Kurdick, a psychology professor at Wright State, and he showed that there was both a 4 and a 7-year range. The study showed that couples often began their unions with high levels of quality, but that it appeared to decrease twice, once after the first 4 years and again after 7. This study also showed that couples with children experienced a more rapid decline in the quality of their marriage. In 2010, a study showed that the majority of couples who divorced had now spent more than a decade together before going their separate ways. Another study, which was conducted by Grant Thornton Accountability Group, utilized information from a survey of 90 law firms and concluded that marriages are most likely to fail about 12 years. So now we have 4, we have 7, we have 10, we have 12. So finally, a 2012 study done by a parenting website seemingly refuted all of those established facts. The study showed that couples with young children are 4.5 times more likely to split after 3 years than the traditional 7. Among all these things, after you look at all these statistics, the experts decided there is no magic number. It happens at any age and at any time and at any time of your marriage or commitment to one another. And that makes a lot more sense. But no matter how long you've been together, a couple that doesn't prioritize their marriage will fall by the wayside. Marriage is important, and your commitment to each other. David may have been going through a midlife crisis. When you looked at his life and he wasn't satisfied. Remember, he had it all. And he still felt a hole and an emptiness that he needed to be filled. And he thought he chose another woman to fill it. Others have chosen drugs and alcohol. Some people choose extra work, pornography, hobbies, affairs. Those things people try to stick in those spots to fill that emptiness that they can't find a way to fix. David didn't seem to know how to handle dissatisfaction when it entered his life. But one thing we can see by all our findings, every marriage does not know how to handle and to mature through a dissatisfaction period. If every marriage goes through these cycles, why do some make it and some don't? What are the differences between those marriages that make it and they get through that? What are the signs that they're heading down the wrong path? Well, verse 1 is our very first beginning on David's life. That was David's first mistake. He remained home when he should have been at work. He stayed away from what he should have been doing. Instead, he found himself at ends without anything to do. He took a season off. When he should have been out leading an army, he was sitting around with a lot of extra time on his hands. We set ourselves up for sin when we lack focus in our days, and we fail to seek God's plan for us each day. God set up a series of roadblocks to help David stop sinning successfully. First, when David did get up there and was walking around, the woman was on a different roof. It wasn't his own roof, it was the neighbor's. And he could have turned around. He could have admired the scenery, and he could have turned around and left. I mean, there's nothing wrong with seeing a beautiful woman and saying, wow, that's a beautiful woman. God doesn't say that's a sin. I mean, there's no sin in admiring what God just created. I heard a man shared this about what his father called, his son asked him one time, what's the difference between lust and just admiring a beautiful woman? And the father said, well, he said, let's pretend you're walking down the sidewalk and this beautiful, gorgeous woman comes towards you and you look towards each other and say, yeah, that's a beautiful woman. But when she walks past, you turn around and you look again. And then you start thinking about more than just how beautiful she is. That's lust. That second look that gets us into trouble. It's that time you just start thinking about the possibilities when there really isn't any. So as he saw that beautiful woman, he could have said, wow, that's a beautiful woman. Uriah's a lucky man. And he could have turned around and went downstairs. Unfortunately, he saw that beautiful woman and he said, I think I want to have that. So that was his next step, because he found out she was married. That should have been a roadblock for anybody. She's a married woman, hands off. So there was the next one. He just kept plowing through all these roadblocks that God was putting out there. And then when he realized what he had done, he could have fessed up and repented. He could have told Uriah. He could have apologized. I'm sure Uriah wouldn't have said too much to the king. But he didn't. Instead, he decided he's going to cover it up and hide his sin. And he got rid of Uriah. And he tried to justify it by marrying her afterwards. David had cut himself off from all accountability in his life. He had no one to stop him and say, David, what are you doing? He had no servant or friend that was brave enough to stand up to him when he was doing this. In fact, most of his friends were probably out fighting the war. But here he was. He had no accountability. He had no one to keep him from getting in trouble. And he was probably not very close to the Lord at this time as well. Probably got lazy in his faith. When the Ark of the Covenant was with the troops, they didn't have regular church services. You were on your own to study your word, study God's word, and to stay close to him. And sounds like David obviously was quite far away from God. If he could justify what he'd been doing, he couldn't have been close to God at that time. When we allow ourselves to get that second look, or stay at the office after hours, and get bored in our relationships, or we cut ourselves off from God, we set ourselves up for a crash. Roadblocks are there to keep us safe, to protect us and our families from terrible tragedy. David ignored all the roadblocks and he destroyed his marriage. He destroyed the marriage of Uriah and Bathsheba. He's destroyed families and hurt an entire kingdom. His choices had terrible consequences. When we marry, we need to be courageous. Marriage maturity starts and sustains with a no options policy in our lives. Because when we leave options in our thinking, they will lead to optional living. We need to make the decision from the very beginning that there will be no divorce, no quitting, no adultery, and no emotional drifting. We need to set up roadblocks and put safeguards in place. We also must purpose in our hearts and lives that no matter how bad it gets, we won't entertain the idea of divorce or quitting. In Genesis 2, as we read earlier, a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. Marriage brings two people together and makes them one. Doesn't make them two parts stuck together or just intertwined. He makes them one thing. So when one of them is broke off, it's not just, taken apart. It's destroyed, basically, from what it's supposed to be. Marriage brings two people together. And we are to cleave to each other, even if they irritate us, even if they bug us, even if we're a bit dissatisfied at the time. We are to cleave to that other person. When we entertain the idea of divorce or consider breaking apart, we're tearing apart something that will not be neat or easy to clean up. When we entertain these options, it's a lot easier to think, maybe I married the wrong one. Wake up one day and say, I just don't love him anymore. Or maybe, this is too hard, I quit. But we don't want to belittle the fact that there are times where divorce is something that we need to consider or to do. We're not saying to stay together during an abusive situation or continued adultery or anything like that. God does not call us to be a doormat to the other person. But he does call us to die to self and submit to each other. As believers, we are to submit one to another. Unfortunately, the option of divorce or quitting happens often just because people say they fell out of love. And they forget their vows before God and man that said, till death do us part. When we allow dissatisfaction to remain in our marriage, we're setting ourselves up for failure. We begin to compare ourselves or compare our marriages to somebody else or compare our spouse to that person over there or compare our family or our kids to those kids over there. And we think we've missed something. We wanted something else in our lives. We think we should go get something else and try something new. We turn to another person, or sometimes we turn to alcohol or drugs or pornography, something outside of that relationship. And we're not spending the time where it should be. The best way to keep our marriages healthy is to keep our relationship with God healthy. To stay connected to the power source is Jesus Christ. Jesus told his disciples to stay connected. David had let go and become disconnected from God. As a couple, we need to stay connected to our power source, especially during those times of dissatisfaction. John 15 gives us a picture of a vine and branches. And Jesus said, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. Remain in me, as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. When we're bearing fruit, we're connected to God. The fruit of love and commitment to our spouse is one of those connections that will remain healthy and satisfying if we stay connected. If we listen to those roadblocks, if we have somebody that holds us accountable, there's always going to be something that wants to destroy our marriage. Satan loves to destroy Christian marriages. That's one of his things. God is the one that started marriage, so anything out of that, the world and Satan and everybody wants to destroy anything good in our marriages. We have to be careful that busyness and boredom don't settle in. I was reading someplace the other day about couples that kind of just go through the motions. I think it's probably in our devotions in the morning. And it talked about, if you've been married for a while, sometimes you do get kind of in a rut. And you do the same things every day, and you watch the same shows every night, or you sit together at the same time, or whatever. And I got to thinking, yeah, there's times where you do kind of get a little bored, or you think maybe you need something more exciting in your life. But the best place to do is stir it up right there in your marriage and change some stuff around. But God wants us to be, He likes us to be creative. There's nothing wrong with that. He wants us to be creative with our spouse. He wants us to be protected, but he also wants us to continue to grow into maturity as a couple. As Tracy and I were talking about people that have been married for a long time, their marriages, to watch these healthy marriages and how they've stayed connected and enjoyed each other over all these years. So there's some of the roadblocks that we can put. We can be very intentional about those things that keep us from to be temptation. As a pastor, there are times when, obviously, I do some counseling. One of the things I always want to make sure of is that I'm not alone with a man in my home or my offices or here at the church. So a lot of times when I have a meeting with a male, I'll try to do it at Culver's or at a restaurant or someplace where I'm not alone with another man, because I don't want it's so easy for that kind of stuff to turn into something else. During counseling, somebody's sharing their heart and you get along and all this, and it's very dangerous territory. But it can happen in any part of our lives. A lot of us travel or work with the opposite sex. We have to be careful that our relationships with the opposite sex stay just work-related. We have to be careful how deep our friendships get with those. We have to be careful that we put some kind of roadblock there for us. No matter your age or the years you're married, temptation can come. Often temptation comes in a place where you're confident that it won't happen. Because you think, wow, I've got this one down. A lot of times it'll come in those places where we think we're already taken care of. We need to commit to being intentional in our love with each other. We need to commit to no emotional drifting. You can't have 20 years of maturity in a 5-year marriage. Unfortunately, you can have only 5 years of maturity in a 20-year marriage. To gain maturity in marriage, you need to work at it. There are couples that have been married 20 years who are just living together. They really don't do anything together. They don't share their heart with each other. They appear at family outings, but they're emotionally detached from each other. They're losing out on the joy of being married to being attached and cleaving to their spouse. They may have only had 5 years of maturity in this long-term relationship. They've refused to grow and to put any work into it. They think this is all there is. That's all we're supposed to do. And it's just such a waste. They've wasted everything. There's an element of dissatisfaction in that room that must be kicked out. We can have marriages that are a testimony of our faith in Christ. We can have a marriage that is filled with love and joy and blessings that God wants it to be. But we got to commit. In Ephesians 6, Paul was reminding the believers that they were changed and that their lives, including their marriage, needed to reflect their new lives in Christ. At the beginning of the chapter, they're reminded of their past. He looks at the Ephesians, he writes to them, he says, you all were sinners. You all did, and he named a bunch of sins. He named sexual immorality, he named drunkenness, he named a whole gamut of sin that there's out there, even in that time period. And they really haven't changed much from today. And he said, but that's what you used to be. Now, be a child of light. Your lives have changed. Be somebody new. And he said, be very careful then how you live. Not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, don't be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. For this is a reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. As believers, we are called to be different. And if we are married and thinking about marriage someday, we must determine that that part of our lives will be different as well. We are all members of the body of Christ. Even in our marriages, we need to act like it. We need to love unconditionally as Christ loved us. In Ephesians, it tells the husband to love his wife as Christ loved the church and was willing to die for her. Do we love each other that much as Christians? Are we willing to die for that person next to you? That person that you share a home with, share a life with. And it's not just the husband for the wife. The wife was to love her husband as her head, as of Christ, as of the church. We are to love each other that way, unconditionally. We are all members of that body. We need to love that way. We also need to become centered on our worth through the Creator, and we can't expect our spouse to fill every hole in our hearts, every hole in our lives. That's not what they're meant for. God created us to put Him in those holes, not our spouse. And we need to avoid spouse bashing with our peers. As a couple, we need to model Ephesians 5 to our children, our neighbors, and our co-workers. The strength of a marriage is not merely in the number of years of marriage, but being staying and rooted and dependent on God. In bringing our holes and our buckets to Him versus dumping them on our spouse, we can bring our problems to Him and He'll help us and He'll guide and direct us. David cut himself off from the vine and he ceased to bloom in God's blessings. We need to decide that when we're dissatisfied, when things are creeping in our marriage, we need to put safeguards in place so we don't go outside our marriage to fulfill them. We need to be held accountable in regards to our internet, our television, our shopping, our food, our personal body, our obsessions, friends, and time spent away from home. We need to be held accountable for those. We need to find an accountability partner. We need to have somebody of the same sex that can say, how are you doing? How's your marriage going? Stay in God's Word. He will guide and direct us. He said, if you put me first, all these things will be added to you. If you put me first, I will direct your path. Be active in your local church or a Bible study in some group of believers that will help you to grow and encourage you in your walk. And get a healthy married couple to mentor you. I know a young couple right now, I asked them if they were going to counseling. And I think they still need the counseling, but they said they're going to at least have a healthy married couple who's going to start mentoring them and helping them keep their marriage together. Because they were one of these young couples that got married and just a few months afterwards, what did we do? And now there's, they need to grow together, but they need some help. All of us want a satisfying marriage. All of us want to enjoy satisfaction in our lives. Jesus said if we're connected to Him, to the vine, we will have life and be filled with Him. He said we can have it to the full. Well, all of us want to have life to the full. Jesus said, I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. Jesus is all we need. He desires to satisfy every part of our lives. No human can satisfy us. Only a relationship with Him can bring true satisfaction. As Jesus was sharing in chapter 15 of John with His disciples, that last night they were together, they were sharing the Passover. When He shared about the vine and being connected, they were sharing the Passover together. So today we're going to close with Jesus as He set up a new sacrament for the believers and for the church. We call it communion, or the Last Supper. And so we're going to share that together. Paul wrote to the Corinthians, the Lord Jesus, on the night He was betrayed, took bread, and when He had given thanks, He broke it and said, this is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, after supper, He took the cup and He said, this cup is a new covenant in my blood, and do this whenever you drink in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until He comes. As in marriage, the husband and wife are willing to submit to each other to the point of death for their spouse, just as Christ was willing to die for us. He was obedient to death. He has called us to remember his great love for us as we too share the elements of bread in Jesus' body. So as our ushers come up this morning, and our